Testing. 1, 2, 3. Are we hearing me? Okay. Everybody. All right. Gotta see if y'all can hear and he can hear, and then we'll leave it on. We had to go back to one of the old ones because decided that cutting out last week before, was right in the little mic part. So anyway, all this modern stuff, and things get tinier and tinier and tinier, and that means they're able to break easier. I was very concerned with cars. They have all these new things on them, and I remember the old window, you just cranked it open, and then they get all the little electronic things, and I always think, every new electronic thing, it's wonderful when it works, but as soon as it breaks, it's going to cost you so much more money to get it fixed. I have noticed, yes. So that's what progress means. Yes, I have a red ink pen. I thought I'd use it so I'd know what was today and not get it mixed up with last week or the week before. Well, we need to give folks a little while to get in here and see. Yeah. Oh, light the candles? Oh, yeah, I got to light that candle. I thought you were asking me to light the candle. That's kind of like asking me to light your fire. Light my fire. No, you mean light my candle. That's lighting a candle and lighting a fire. A little bit different in the degree of heat and how much light there would be. Well, they're still going on. So we got through all the rape of Dinah problems. Thought I'd use that, but that doesn't want to. There we go. Oh, okay. Yeah, we'll see. Did you see them do it? They closed it up and set it just. Okay. Well, I try to do that. I get frustrated when folks move my stuff and don't put it back. Right. I mean, it was broken and I fixed it. I am. I remember way back when I was at St. Stephen's, we had these little carts. They looked like little dollies. They had 4 wheels on them, and they had angle iron, and they were square. And what their function was to pick up a chair and set it on this little dolly, and then those chairs would stack, so you'd have a stack of chairs. Well, one day, one of the wheels fell off of the little dolly, and I was so frustrated because whoever let the wheel fall off of the dolly did not save the wheel so we could go get it fixed. So here we had a 3-wheel dolly with a missing wheel, and it would have been so easy to fix it. So we waited until, let's see, I've been here 23 years, 29 years. That was somewhere in the middle of my time there. So maybe 35 years ago, and I'm still worried about that missing wheel on that dolly. It would have been so easy to fix. No, but I remember, keep my eyes open, and if something falls off, grab it and get it fixed. In fact, I'm a little frustrated. We have one here. I saw somebody had stepped on the little wooden baseboard in Rose Chapel and broke a chip off of the wood. And I saw it, and I picked it up, and I took it to one of our custodians. I said, this is where this came from. Hold on to it so you can glue it back, and it'll be fixed. And I reminded them, and now it's been 6 months, and it's still broken, it is not fixed, and that piece of wood is missing. And from now on, exactly, now I know. So, I got some counseling once, and you know what my biggest liability is for that's keeping me from being happy and mellow? It's kind of the perfectionist. I have an overactive sense of responsibility. And so it's hard just let things go and say, not my problem. Not my problem. Somebody else's problem. It's not my problem. Anyway, and then I feel guilty because I could have fixed it and it would have been fixed. So, anyway, here we go. We left off with the rape of Dinah and the slaughter of the people in Shechem, and so we get to this point. God, in chapter 35, God said to Jacob, "Arise, go up to Bethel and settle there. Make an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau." Now pay attention. God said to Jacob, "Arise and go." And then this God is saying, "Go make an altar to the God who appeared to you then when you were fleeing from Esau." Anyway, after he tells him to do that, "Put away the foreign gods that are among you, and purify yourselves, and change your clothes. Then come, let us go up to Bethel, that I may make an altar there to the God who answered me in the day of my distress, and has been with me wherever I have gone." So they gave to Jacob all the foreign gods that they had, and the rings that were in their ears, and Jacob hid them under the oak that was near Shechem. As they journeyed, a terror from God fell upon the cities all around them, so that no one pursued them. Jacob came to Luz, that is Bethel, which is in the land of Canaan, and he and the people who were with him, and there they built an altar and called the place El Bethel, because it was there that God had revealed himself to him when he fled from his brother. And Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died. She was buried under an oak below Bethel. So it was called Elon Bachuth. God appeared to Jacob again when he came from Padan Aram, and he blessed him. God said to him, "Your name is Jacob. No longer shall you be called Jacob, but Israel shall be your name." So he was called Israel. God said to him, "I am God Almighty. Be fruitful, multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall come from you, and kings shall spring from you. The land that I gave to Abraham and Isaac I will give to you, and I will give the land to your offspring after you." Then God went up from him at the place where he had spoken with him. Jacob set a pillar in the place where he had spoken with him, a pillar of stone, and he poured out drink offering on it and poured oil on it. So Jacob called the place where God had spoken with him Bethel. He's getting a little forgetful. Does things and then he does them again, which again we see when we have these redundancies, this weaving together of different traditions by the later redactor in order to get all the pieces. And as I've said before, they felt that all of those traditions are sacred and holy, and they had to be very careful to not eliminate and throw things away because they were sacred texts. So we end up with lots of repetition and redundancies as they put two different traditions together that tell the same story a little differently. But anyway, they journeyed from Bethel, and when they were still some distance from Ephrath, Rachel was in childbirth, and she had hard labor. And when she was in her hard labor, the midwife said to her, "Do not be afraid, for now you will have another son." As her soul was departing, for she died, she named him Ben-Oni, but his father called him Benjamin. So Rachel died, and she was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is, Bethlehem. Now we're told it's not the Bethlehem of the birth of Jesus, but a different Bethlehem that was in a different location. This couldn't have been the same Bethlehem. But anyway, it's just another kind of side comment that's in the text. And Jacob set up a pillar at her grave. It is the pillar of Rachel's tomb, which is there to this day. Israel journeyed on and pitched his tent between the tower of Edar, or beyond the tower of Edar. While Israel lived in the land, Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard of it, and he was not happy. Now the sons of Jacob were 12, the sons of Leah, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn. Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, the sons of Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin, the sons of Bilhah, Rachel's maid, Dan and Naphtali, the sons of Zilpah, Leah's maid, Gad and Asher. And these were the sons of Jacob, who were born to him in Paddan Aram. So, what are we to make of this part of the story? Well, let's see what we can make of it. I feel like, to a certain extent, chapter 35 could have very easily followed chapter 33 and not had chapter 34, the whole rape of Dinah episode and story. Because at the end of 33, we have the meeting and reconciliation of Jacob and Esau, and then they go on, and we hear Jacob goes up and settles at Shechem. And then we very easily could have had this, and then God told him to get up from there and go to Bethel without all the other story of Dinah. But 35 does begin, God said to Jacob, "Arise, go up to Bethel, and dwell there." Now here he says, "and dwell there." But as soon as he makes the altar and sacrifices, then he takes off and he leaves. He doesn't stay there. He doesn't dwell there. So, anyway, a lot of inconsistencies. But anyway, there's no specific mention to the bloodbath of Levi and Simeon that God tells him to get out of there before the people, get mad and seek retaliation and are able to find you. There's no explanation about that. It seems to be separate and unrelated. But go to Bethel and build an altar, and the voice does not say, "Build an altar to me who's talking to you now." It says, "Build an altar to the God that appeared to you when you fled Esau." Now, it's not the God that you wrestled with when you were coming back, but the God of, the ladder of Jacob, the angels ascending and descending. That event that this is referring to. And it's not the God at the end of the wrestling match where it says, "And I have seen God face to face, yet my life is preserved," but a reference to that other encounter or that other God. Now, in our thinking, whenever our Bible says God, our minds presume that it means the one and only, the God Almighty, Creator of the universe, Father of our Lord Jesus. But the patriarchs, and some extent the redactor, the Yahwists, the Elohists, the priestly writers, did not always think of God as the only deity that there is, the one true God, this universal encompassing God. God was still more in their experience and thinking a local and more immediate God. They knew God only from the short and brief experiences, and most of those were fleeting experiences, to say the least. They'd not yet had the centuries of theological reflection. They hadn't had the debates and the councils that argued out the doctrines. They didn't have libraries of the greatest theologians and minds that had pondered and written concepts that they could research and try to learn from. They were way in the beginning as these thoughts and understandings were beginning, and they only had those brief encounters to use. So this passage sounds a little like the God that's with Jacob at Shechem is telling him to go to Bethel and build an altar to the God at Bethel. It kind of sounds like two different gods, but we do have the one phrase where he does say, "And God was with me all these times," but the language kind of exposes an understanding of who God is still in the process of evolving and growing, because we have different concepts in the way the stories are woven together. Von Rad points this out. He said, the God that's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and expressions, the God of our fathers, is a tradition and the way God is used and spoken of gives a little different image of God than the Yahwist has God in their expressions. And we remember different times we have El Roy and El Shaddai and Bethel and El Bethel and El Shechem and so forth. It's the God of these different places. And that's their experience in their very primitive times. They experience God. Well, where do I experience God? At this holy site, this special site. I go away, God stays there. And it's a part of the evolution to understand that God goes with us. And one of the biggest parts of that experience was the captivity, the Babylonian captivity, that even though they were taken away from their homeland, that through the words of the prophets, they could still begin to learn that God is with them even in captivity. And it's where they developed the synagogue worship, because the temple was always the temple and the shrine and the local place to offer sacrifices, whereas where you met the God, the local God that lived in that place, that was the concept. God was tied to the shrine, the temple, the place. And so a lot of that kind of concept kind of filters through or slips through in the words that we're reading in these passages. Anyway, what seems to be going on is that Jacob is to make a pilgrimage from Shechem to Bethel. And building an altar there is an act of transferring from Shechem to Bethel the title, the authority, the special place, that the official place that's now going to be the worship center for the children of Israel. And this reminder of having encountered God there really may be simply a way of saying that this is what makes that place the legitimate worship center. That's where you first had this very important encounter. So that's why this should be the worship center. It doesn't say that, but that's one of the things we can kind of assume. Now, the word for go to Bethel in the Hebrew is A-L space A. In the Hebrew, we're told that it often means pilgrimage. Now, pilgrimage is not just journey. They're not the same. They're both journeys where you move from one place to another, but the sense of pilgrimage is a religious journey for the purpose of some cultic act or worship act. And so this passage does have some of those trappings of a pilgrimage with the elements that will follow. Jacob tells his household to put away the foreign gods that are among you. Now, both commentators say this is a reference to Rachel's having the teraphim from Laban's house that she had stolen, and she was sitting on them and didn't get up because she was on her period, and so Laban couldn't search that spot, and that's where she had hidden the teraphim. And those were the household gods. And at that time, we didn't know whether she stole them out of anger toward him and wanted to leave him vulnerable. And this was one of the ways she could get back at him for being a mean daddy. Or if she had some belief in them and wanted those household gods when she got to her new home to be a part of her security and good luck and so forth. But anyway, we don't know. It doesn't tell us. But the sense that he was telling his household to get rid of all of these other gods that they may have. The shrine that you were going toward, you don't want to come into that place. It's, I guess, if we could think of football stadiums as shrines to some of the gods of our culture, to have someone go parading in wearing the jersey and the hats or whatever of the opposing team and go plop themselves down on the home teams right in the middle of their stadium. I mean, it would be like, I guess, well, I grew up in Norman, so I'm going to refer to OU in the stadium if on the west side is the home team side, and if it was the Bedlam game and you had a little group of folks show up on the west side on the 39th row between the 45 and the 50-yard line to watch the game wearing orange and cowboy hats and boots and so forth, they would not be well received. So in a similar sense, showing up at the shrine of some deity, wearing jewelry and symbols of other gods, you wouldn't be well received. And so that's part of that idea of take all these things off, get rid of them before you make the pilgrimage. Now the earrings could have been like good luck charms that had the concept of magical properties to keep evil spirits away or bad luck away. And even there were some earrings that were crescents that they're fairly certain often people would wear as a part of the cult to the moon god. So you have a crescent like a new moon as a part of an earring, and so that's a symbol of dedication to that. I guess another would be like a lot of jewelry would be made with the peace sign, and so if you were one who was concerned about war and violence and you wanted to make a statement of your values about peace and the absence of war or working toward peace or ending wars, then you would display that value by what's on your jewelry. A lot of people wear crosses to express that. So the wearing of jewelry demonstrates values and loyalties and so forth. But if you're going to a shrine, you don't want to wear anything that would be contrary or different than what the values and so forth are at the shrine. So Von Rad believes that this disposal of all the foreign gods and the earrings is not from the God of our fathers, because at the patriarchal time, the God of our fathers was still primitive and very tolerant of the other gods. They believe their God was the main God and the best God and the most powerful gods, but there were still other gods around. But they weren't important, they were insignificant, but still had the thought of them being there, and they were a little bit tolerant if people wanted to have household gods and those kind of things. It's kind of like little superstitions. We've talked about that before. As long as your main focus is God, if you have a few little superstitions, it's not going to hurt that much. But when we get to the Yahwist, it has to be pure. We cannot have any of that. And so, anyway, he's seeing a blending there that's happening here in this story with the getting rid of all of the gods. He sees as a strong Yahwist influence on the story. Now, the other part is he suggests that this was probably an actual historical occurrence of the movement of the central location for worship. It happened at different times in the history of Israel. We do have the time when it was moved to Jerusalem to make that the center of the worship for the people. But before that, there were times when it was at Bethel and Shechem and different places, and then those places would compete with each other, and so they tried to centralize in order to unify the people. So anyway, but the historical timing, he says, is probably sometime in the period of the Judges. Now, if we're all still around when we get to Judges, we'll deal with those different stories of a judge arises to lead the people when they fall away from God, and then that judge serves his or her time, and then they're done with their service, and then things kind of go bad again, and then a new judge has to raise up and try to lead the people back to God and so forth, until they get to a monarchy and have a king. So the next part of this idea of the pilgrimage is the change of clothes. Change your clothes. And this symbolizes also a clean break with the past, making a clean start. It's an act of purification. Take off all those dirty clothes. And we don't know whether they, were burned or wadded up and thrown in with all the jewelry and stuff, and all of it was buried together. Just change your clothes. Maybe you just washed them and put them away, but you put on new clothes. But it becomes a symbol of something new life, new identity, and so forth. But in our Christian tradition, we have one of, the Easter. You got to get a new Easter outfit. That this is a special time, a special occasion, and so we need to dress for that special occasion, and a part of that is something new. So, our Christian baptism traditions at the very beginning, I don't know if all of you would, we think circumcision is not a very pleasant experience, but in early times, if you're getting baptized, you just stripped naked before the congregation and went out into the river or wherever it was, and were baptized. And so after your baptism, and that was generally an immersion, in some places the water might not have been deep enough, so it was a pouring, and pouring is like a washing. But anyway, usually immersion, and the symbol of immersion is going under the water to die to the old self and the old life, and to come back up new, reborn, a new person. And so with a new baptismal name, a new identity, and then come out of the water, sometimes anointed with oil and dried or patted down. However, there was some inappropriate touch, and some of the male ministers at early time got in trouble for that, and so they had to abandon that practice. But nevertheless, after coming out of the water naked, put on a white, clean robe as a way of symbolizing your purity. You've been washed clean of all the sin, of the past, and now you are a new person. You make a new start, a new life. So this connection of clothing, taking off and getting rid of the old clothing, putting on new clothing, has a very long and rich tradition with pilgrimages and baptisms, and as a sacred symbolic act within the life of the religious community, not just Christian folk, but a lot of people in places where that's very important. One of the practices in the Muslim pilgrimage, especially to Mecca, was also to leave behind clothing and adornments, jewelry and so forth, which might offend the sanctuary of the place that they were going, which would be Mecca. Another aspect of Mecca, if I remember my history correctly, was that when Mecca was established as that center of worship that Muhammad created, an aspect of that was that all the little household and local gods were all gathered up and taken to Mecca, and they were stored there. Muhammad didn't try to make everybody stop believing in those gods, but rather gathered them all up and put them in one place so that people could make pilgrimages to worship those gods. But the main part was that stopping at different times of the day and everybody praying together. And you'd pray toward Mecca. You have to get oriented, but pray toward Mecca. And that was a very brilliant way of unifying the people, because everybody was doing the same thing at the same time, and it equalized everybody's gods. They didn't have to argue about whose God was better or whatever. Just they were all there, and they were all together, and that kind of equalized the God's status among the people. But the orienting all the people in the same direction at the same time was a very brilliant and powerful stabilizing strategy and unifying strategy culturally and religiously together. Regardless of all the other beliefs and ideas, that was very effective, and it worked until they had the split, and then they had the Shia and the Sunnis, and you just can't keep people together. They're going to argue and fight for superiority. Anyway, Jacob hid the gods and the earrings under the oak. We presume the sacred oak that was near Shechem. Now, it says he hid them. Now, the thought here, why did he hide them? He had other options. He could have sold them. They could have had a moving sale and raised some cash for the journey. Or it could have just given them away, or had a huge fire and burned it all and melted them all, destroyed them all. But instead, he buries them. And so I'm wondering, with that little statement that way, was this an act of, well, if things don't go well, then I can come back and dig these gods up and we can then come back? Was this kind of hedging his bets? Or was it out of respect? I don't know what to do with you guys, so sorry, but I'm just going to put you in a safe place. I'm going to protect you under this oath, and you're going to be fine. But my God that's more important than you little gods has called me to go on this journey, so I can't take you along. I have to leave you here. And I'm putting you under the sacred oak. You are protected. You're safe there. The other part is that this is in the model of a pilgrimage, and in the original kind of thought, it might have been, it isn't go to Bethel and settle there, just make the pilgrimage, set up an altar, and then you can come back. And if that's all it is, he didn't have a bank to put him in the safety deposit box. He didn't have anywhere else. They were, this foreign group in this land. He didn't have friendly neighbors that say, we're going on vacation for a couple of days or so. Can you pick up the paper and mail and feed the dog and that sort of thing? We'll be right back. It wasn't that kind of relationship with the neighbors. So he had to hide them and put them in a safe place if it was just a pilgrimage and he's coming back. That might be what's in the early part of that story and its tradition. So we don't know. But we don't ever hear of the story returning to the sacred oak at Shechem and digging up the the jewelry and the gods and so forth. However, one of the family members might have, and they may have gone out there with their metal detectors, and they're trying to find them so they could dig them up and go cash them in and make some money off of them. But the other part is maybe in the long-range plan that it was meant to be that thousands of years later the archaeologists will find that stash of buried jewelry and idols and give us some insight. We'll wait and see. I was reflecting on this text and this primitiveness of their understanding of who is this God who's speaking to the patriarch. And the sense of sometimes that's the God in this location is the one who's talking to me, and if I'm in another location and I experience God and God's telling me something, then why would I think that the God over here talking to me is the same God that talked to me over there? Or how would I try to discern the nature of the God? Because in these early times, they did understand that there were spiritual beings and God, but some of the gods in their concept, in their mind, were not the God of love. They didn't. What was the nature of this God? Did this God have care and warm feelings for this person? Or was this like and the development of the Satan and the evil spirits? Is this the tempter who wants to lead me astray, lead me into danger and destruction? Just because a divine being says, go do something, how do I know? This is the good God, the real God, that's asking me to do that. Because all these stories, it's a very fleeting experience. So that made me start to think and wonder, in our experience, we have had a whole culture that has developed an idea of who God is, and from our Bible stories and theology and church. And generally, we have all been educated and programmed with a concept of God and God's nature and God's will and God's purpose and all of that, so that if we had a deep religious, spiritual experience, then all that educating of our minds would have been drawn upon for us to think and assume that in this religious experience, it's that God. Has anybody had another experience when you thought, this is a weird God, I don't believe this is the good God, this is something else? Ever occurred to you? Now we have stories of people saying that God told them to go kill somebody. And once they get caught and arrested, then they're given a psychological analysis and they discover they're crazy. But some of the things that people attribute to God telling them to do something may not be so extreme as murder, but they can be misdirected. We have, a lot of places where there are folks who are in religious institutions that have a lot of money, and then they misappropriate funds, or they try to lead the congregation into some really foolish endeavors. There was, I don't know if that's part of it, but I think it's out on Garnett, 21st or 31st. There was another denomination's church that had built this huge steel structure. This is the framework for a huge new church building. And it sat there year after year after year after year. And that could have been a place where someone was saying, God told me we should launch this project? And everybody said, well, you're the preacher and God told you? Well, sure. Amen. Praise the Lord. Let's move ahead. When it was not God. It was that person's ego wanting to say, look what I did. I don't know if that's the story there, but it's just kind of an example of what sometimes can happen. He didn't claim that it was. We had a pastor many years ago who had the job of treasurer for the Tulsa district, and he had this idea that he and some others that if you would invest in gold and silver, that it would make this huge return on your investment. And so the district superintendent told this pastor, no, I don't think you ought to do that. And he went ahead and did it. And so he invested in all that with the district money, and gold and silver went south, and it was about $8,000 of the district's money that went into the toilet. Now, he didn't claim that God was telling him to do that, but anyway, it was a very foolish decision and costly. But sometimes people use bad judgment, and they will try to say it's God. So how do we discern if those stirrings in us, or those voices that we think we hear, or the thoughts that we think God has put there, how do we discern that that's God? Who has a lot of experience with that? Anybody? Well, it raises the question when we're reading these stories about the patriarchs, and that they're at the very beginning, at these times, that the faith is developing when they have these strong experiences. Did they question? The story says they just, yes, sir, and they just start off. But then as we read the story, he says, go to Bethel and live there, but then he doesn't stay there. He just goes, makes the altar, and moves on. But anyway, as we move ahead, Jacob leaves and heads for Bethel, and no one around attacks him or pursues him. The terror of the Lord fell upon all the cities. And this may be a reference to the Levi and Simeon brutal act that God did protect them. But it could simply be that this is a small group moving through these areas, and at any time, the larger group could decide, they got lots of cattle and sheep, I think we'll just go take their cattle and sheep and enslave them or kill them off and take their women and children as slaves, and that'll be the end of it. But anyway, that did not happen to them, and they went on. But they arrive at the land of Canaan in Bethel or Luz, and they built the altar, and he names it the El Bethel. And then Deborah dies, Rebekah's nurse. Not Rachel's nurse, but Rebekah's nurse. That's Jacob and Esau's mother. Now, what is she doing traveling with them at this point? This is very strange for Deborah to appear and to die and then disappear again. But Von Rod suggests that there was a tradition, that there was a shrine or a marker for Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, that was located near Bethel. And the ancient author wanted to mention it and preserve that recognition in the story, so he had to find a place to insert that mention of the shrine to Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, having been buried near Bethel in the sanctuary. Another part of the reason for mentioning that could have been another part of building the case for why Bethel should be the cultic worship center. Jacob had experienced God's presence there. Rebekah's nurse, Deborah, was buried near there. So we're building the case for why this should be the worship center rather than Shechem or Jerusalem or some other place. So maybe that's why that story is just plopped in there at this point, and chronologically it doesn't fit well, but locationally, geographically, it fits. We're building the case for the centrality of Bethel being the worship center, the cultic sanctuary. And anybody who had fond remembrances of Rebekah and Deborah, any stories, then they would be wanting to agree. Yeah, that's the right place. Well, Jacob then sets up a pillar and pours a drink offering on it and an oil offering on it, and again names the place Bethel. The two namings show us, as I said before, kind of a blending and a binding of the stories and traditions together. Then we get to 36:9. God appears again to Jacob, and he blesses him, and he changes his name. So we get another name change here from Jacob to Israel. And God identifies God's self. This time he says, I am God the Almighty. And he reiterates the gift and the commands of the land and all of the numbers of people and nations and kings will come from you that we first heard with Abraham. So we're connecting these things together. And then God appears and he speaks. And when God appears and speaks, it's so often to claim a person. You know, when God comes to you, that's saying, you're mine. I'm claiming you when God comes to you. But in all the stories, it's not, I'm coming to you, I'm speaking to you, I'm your God, and you're my special person, and I love you, and you will just sit there and feel blessed and happy and sit on your duff and do nothing. No, that's not what happens. When God comes and speaks to you, you're my person. I claim you, but I'm giving you marching orders. Because I'm claiming you and you're my person and you are special, but you are now called to go do or to be something that's changing history. So when God speaks and claims, it's to send you on a mission, to give your life some specific purpose, to work for God and to do something. And in that regard, it's very significant to have a name change. You're not the old person who used to have this lifestyle and purpose. You're claimed now, you have a new purpose, you have a new identity, you have a new name. And so each of those, all of those are tied together. So be fruitful and multiply. Now this may have come from a source before Jacob had had all of his sons, because he's already been fruitful and multiplied. Why does he need to be commanded that at this point? But anyway, it does come right before we hear of his last son, Benjamin's birth. And then in 36:16, then they departed from Bethel. I mean, they get there, create the altar, then they depart. But still, there's some distance from Ephrath, and Rachel went into labor, great distress. Now, we don't have any medical diagnosis for what her problem was, but she dies shortly after the birth, just lives long enough to give the child a name. Her kind of deathbed wish, I want my son to be called Ben-Oni, and then Jacob just doesn't care, he ignores her, and names him Benjamin. Does that seem very nice? That's the way men are anyway. Oh, we did get the Ben part. Yeah, he did honor the Ben part, but we're told that the Ben-Oni means, let's see, where did I write it down? It's a name that is son of my affliction. Son of my affliction. So that could have been a curse on the poor kid So it was the Johnny Cash story or song, Boy Named Sue. And when he finally finds him in later life and says, "Why did you name me Sue?" "Well, I knew I wouldn't be around, son, and if I named you Sue, you'd have to fight all the time, and it'd make you tough, and you could survive." Something like that. Isn't that the way the song goes? Anybody know? Okay. But Jacob calls him son of the right hand. Son of the right hand. And so that's the stronger hand, the hand that greets people and so forth, son of the right hand. So maybe he was trying to protect the boy from kind of being cursed with an awful name that he would have to live with. And son of my affliction might be kind of directing his path through life, that you're going to do all kinds of things that are going to bring trouble and heartache and misery to the family. So if I call you son of my right hand instead of son of my affliction, then I'm giving you a blessing by having a good name. Okay, so as much as Jacob loved Rachel, it's interesting that not more is made about the loss and the death. It's just kind of matter-of-factly stated and have a burial, and then they move on. But anyway, the next verses, Israel does move on, pitches his tent beyond Migdal Elder, while encamped in the region. Then Reuben, the oldest son, the firstborn, but born of Leah, the unloved wife, Reuben goes into Bilhah, Rachel's handmaid, and then turned wife, and concubine, and he lays with her. And when Israel heard it, one translation says he was greatly offended, but ours just says, and he heard about it. Doesn't say any reaction. And that's all we know. But it is brought up later, and it'll be revisited. But that made me wonder, first of all, why wasn't he discreet if he was going to do this? Why wasn't it a secret? Why is it known? And if that's the case, then as the eldest son, the firstborn, sometimes this could be an act of, I'm taking over. Here's a sign, here's a warning, I'm taking over. However, if we get into the human relationships of the story and read those into this, is that it, in emotionally charged times, Rachel's tragic death in childbirth, that Bilhah was her handmaid. She was her closest female companion, possibly, and she may have been grieving deeply. And Reuben may have gone in to comfort her because Jacob wasn't that warm and fuzzy a guy. And so grief and sexual tension, chemistry, whatever, if you ever see a soap opera, you see all this kind of nonsense going on with all the emotion and drama and people having all kinds of inappropriate sexual behavior. So, it may have been that he was there comforting her and ended up spending the night. Doesn't necessarily say they had sexual relations, but it is giving us that idea. But it may not have been. It doesn't say. It leaves it up to our imagination. So I'll leave you with that. Leave that up to your imagination as we end today. But anyway, it's these passages raise all kinds of questions about how do we understand God and what God is calling us to do and where to be and how to act and how to grieve and not grieve. So let's pray. Dear God, we thank you for these stories and all of the background that we can uncover about them to help us